And it's over to you. There we go.
Well, it's really wonderful and special to be here, especially because I was supposed to be here on Purim, and things went a bit wrong. And I have many apologies for that. I really feel bad about that. I love Edgware very much. I didn't just grow up in Edgware, I grew up in this room. This room was the basis of my Judaism, honestly. The Edgware Youth Service, so what it meant, was a very powerful thing. I remember the library over there. I remember the books that I first discovered in that place, the davening that I did, chatting to girls outside at the end of davening as well, a fundamental part of Jewish relationships. So it's a real pleasure to be back here. Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me. And it's to see old friends and members from the community where I grew up. It's a real honor, and to see you're still strong. A lovely second minyan. I daven second minyan, good davening as well. I daven second minyan in Kinloss, and you're bigger. Our minyan is just about 2 minyans worth, about 20. You're a bit bigger here, so it's
that was small today.
Right, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's that's very impressive. So it's wonderful to see you. And I want to show you something that you might not have seen before, which is good for timing now. But let me start with the quote. Here's the quote. You ready? Tradition is the handing on of the living flame, not the worship of the ashes. Again, tradition is the handing on of the living flame, not the worship of the ashes. When I first heard that line, I loved it very much. But it was quite surprising because in our Judaism, very often we look at it as it's all about the past. The word Zachar is repeated over and over again in the Tanakh, always looking back to the origins and our source and what we are. We always say we've gone down in levels, not as great as the past, and we seem to be living in the past. And yet, and again, this is from Edgware, this youth service encouraged us to look to the future. Once a year, we'd kind of take over the main shul on Simchat Torah, come dancing in and, push away all the old people and say, we're the future generation, right? I remember doing that. And Judaism was always about the future, surely. It's about passing on the tradition, passing on the flame to the next one, and not worshipping the ashes. What do you think worshipping the ashes means? Worshipping the ashes.
Honoring the past.
Pardon?
Honoring the past.
Well, honoring the past, but you're not supposed to worship the ashes. You can honor the past, but not worship it. When you worship the ashes, you get stuck in the past. Halacha never changes. We have no innovations. We don't do up the shul. We only do things in the old way that we did it. We never develop new ways. And that will be a mistake. So I'm a big believer in development. The question is, where's this quote from? Tradition is the handing on of the flame, not the worship of the ashes. So when I looked it up, because I read it in many places, they assigned it to the famous composer Gustav Mahler, Jewish composer, fascinating man, talked about this in terms of music and about developing new kinds of symphonies and so on. And they say that it was him. But then I looked further, and it turned out that much earlier before him, they suspected Sir Thomas More, who was a 15th century Christian leader, and actually became a saint. They thought it was him. So I then felt a little bit more uncomfortable. It's a Christian idea rather than a Jewish idea. And for many years I wondered about this phrase because I liked it very much, but it wasn't Jewish. And then I finally found it in the Torah, the origin of it. Okay, and so I discovered it comes in fact from the
controversial there.
It comes in fact from the Torah. So let me explain to you how. Now, for me, I'm a big believer in structure and how the Torah is put together. The Torah is not a series of vortelach, of tidbits. The Torah has a pattern and a structure, and when we learn Torah, it should always be within the framework. And the Sidrot of Bamidbar and Nassau, the two sedras at the beginning of the book of Bamidbar, are very interesting. So first thing to notice, we always lane the Seder of Bamidbar just before Shavuot. Right? The rabbis made sure that there's an overlap between the festival cycle and the Sedra cycle for lots of different reasons. So we'll always read Devarim before Tisha B'Av. And often, as I said, Bamidbar normally falls just before Shavuot, which means Nassau often falls after. Now, Bamidbar, the end of Bamidbar is a bit that no one ever talks about. You know why? Because it's the packing up removals Sedra. At the end of Bamidbar, at the beginning of Nassau, there's an entire chapter of 49 verses, it's just a coincidence maybe, of 49 verses describing how they pack up the Mishkan right? The different Levim would pack up the Mishkan to take it on the journey through the wilderness. Why do we need an entire chapter about that? And it's not even in one Sedra. It's at the end of Bamidbar and the beginning of Nassau. It straddles. And as a result, as it does this year, straddles Shavuot. You can see that? So why do we care about removals? Now I know if you've ever moved house, it is the most traumatic thing that you ever do. But a good idea to do because you end up tidying. Okay, in a way that you wouldn't. You have we all become hoarders as we get older, and it's a good way to think. But why do we care about the now the setting up? I can understand. That's important, setting up the Mishkan every time. But why spend a whole chapter describing the packing up in numbing detail? So I'm going to try and excite you about it. We'll get to the flame in a minute to see what that's about. How did they pack up? How did it work? So first of all, it was done by the Leviim, and they had to be strapping, strong men. It wasn't just the count of 20 and above. That happened at the beginning of Midbar. We counted the rest of the tribes. With the Leviim, we count them from 30 and above because they had to be strong, 30 to 50. They can carry all this kind of stuff. And as you know, there were 3 subgroups, families within Levi. Do you know what their names are? Levi had 3 sons, and they became the 3 heads of families that did things. They were Gershon, Kahat, and Merari. Excellent. And they're just as important as the tribes. How do I know that? Because we've begun in the Seder Bamidbar describing the structure around the Mishkan. So we traveled in the wilderness in formation. We traveled in formation, with the Mishkan packed up in the middle and the tribes around. Do you know there are 3 tribes on each side? 3 tribes to the north, 3 east, 3 south, and 3 west. That makes 12 tribes. But there were 13, because as we know, Yosef's 2 sons became 2 tribes. So if there's 13 tribes, there's only 12 all around. What's the 13th tribe? And that's Levi. Levi wasn't the ones. There were 3, 3, 3, and 3. That was the outer. And then on the inner, you had, again, 4 sides. You had one side Gershon, family of Gershon from Levi, one side Kahat, one side Merari, and on the 4th side, anybody know? By asking, I'll make you wrong. On the 4th side was Moshe and Aaron and his sons, just the Kohanim. So they're the inner. There's the Mishkan. Then you have the tribes of Levi all around, the 3 families and that. Then you have the 12 tribes around. And then what's outside of them? Right? There's the others, the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude who came out on the freedom ticket. Right? When you see your Rav at Marv, just say Erev Rav. When you see the rabbi in the evening, I'll make him smile. Okay, so you have the outer people that came in with, then you have the 12 tribes around, then you have this, and then inside you have the Mishkan. And every time they left, they packed the whole thing up, right? The cloud would remove itself from the Mishkan to move forward to lead them, and they would then pack everything inside. And then again, as I said, a whole chapter describing the packing up. And the packing up of Kahat is in the end of Bamidbar, but the packing of Gershon Merari is in Nassau. Right, so we kind of begin Nassau, which is the Seder after, where think by Nassau Rosh B'nai Gershon, and we're kind of in the middle of it. So it's always interesting when something straddles a Seder. Why is that? So what did Merari carry? What did Gershon carry? What did Kahat carry? And this will help us understand our flame issue. So third of all, we have Merari. So the Mishkan was made of 3 basic elements. 3 elements of the Mishkan in terms of physically. Okay, any architects here? We've had a removal van. Any architects here? First of all, you had the basic structure, the pillars and the boards that held it together. They were quite heavy, but they were the outer basic structure. And they were carried by Merari. And the Seder of Nassau describes how they would pack everything up and carry these boards. Then there was Gershon. Gershon carried the curtains. Right, and the screens that divided everything. So they had boards in some areas, but a lot of it was defined by screens. They'd roll up the screens, the curtains, and carry those as well. Both of those are in the Seder of Nassau. Right, they're important, but not as important as the other bits of the Mishkan. What's left? If you take away the curtains and you take away the boards, what's left? No one ever learns this stuff, right? I always we always do a pasuk at the beginning of the Seder. I'm doing stuff at the end of the Seder. Right? Pardon? Planks of wood is part of the beams. The rings were attached to the objects. You're close. The actual utensils. The actual utensils of the Mishkan. Right? To quote Robert Alter, the cultic paraphernalia. That's what he calls it. The cultic paraphernalia. of the Mishkan. What was the cultic paraphernalia? There was the Aron, the ark, containing the tablets of stone, okay? With the two kruvim on top of it, with the pillars that holding it together. So Kahat carried that. What other objects were there?
Menorah.
We were packing up here, the menorah, right? You got your packing list. I know, if you ever packed home, like you spend the entire time you're packing the house, and then you get to the kitchen, and then you realize the kitchen takes just as long as everything else. Because the kitchen is actually the objects that you use. That's like in the Mishkan, lahavdil. It's the kitchen of the Mishkan, right? So you have the Aron. What else did you say?
Menorah.
We had the menorah. And the menorah was really hard to carry. Why? It was one solid piece of gold. How did they carry that? There's big debates how they did it, okay? Rabbi carried that. What else was there? Pardon? The shulchan, the table with the showbread as well. Absolutely. It says that, and they had to pack up the table. They wrapped all of these, by the way, in separate curtains, right? And then they put all the bits and pieces for making them on top to carry. And Kahat was responsible for all these things. But here's the question. Did they turn the Mishkan off when they moved? What do I mean, turning it off? Did they turn it off?
Consequence.
Right? In the shul, you have a ner tamid.
Yeah.
When you leave here, you still have the ner tamid. At night, in the middle of the night, you have the ner tamid, the burning light of all time. Right? What was the burning light in the Mishkan? Now you're going to say to me, well, there's the menorah. Right? But that's not what we were called. Well, why are we daven Mariv? Why do we daven Mariv? Right? There were two korbanot in the morning and the afternoon, Meshachar and Mincha. So, and our davening parallels that. So why do we daven Mariv?
The deshen, the fats and stuff which have.
That's right. Mariv was because all night they would keep the flame on the Mizbeach, on the altar burning, all the time. Right? And as a result, we don't have to parallel that. So the Mishkan was always on fire. The Aron always had flame on it. What happened when they moved? These are the kind of questions annoying scientists, rabbis, ask. What happened to the flame? What did they do? And also, how the hell did they lift the altar that was so big? Remember, this is an altar they would go up towards, right? It's a huge altar with a big square on it, and they had a metal frame, and they would burn sacrifices day and night the whole time. And there's a flame going on there. How'd you move that? Can they moved it on fire? Health and safety, right? You're not going to be able to do it, right? I was in the I visited the old city on Lag BaOmer one year. Okay, you know, Lag BaOmer, every piece of wood not nailed down in Jerusalem is grabbed. And I walked out the old city because my friends, my family live in the old city. And you go out in Shar Tzion, you've got the Bnei Akiva kids in a lovely little bonfire, sitting in a circle with a guitar, singing songs. And then next to them, you have a kind of different group. Okay, kind of hooligan, ultra-Orthodox guys with a flame literally 10 foot high, and they're jumping over it. These boys. And I'm standing there like a British Jew going, what? Secure health and safety, what you do? And they're just like, just leave them alone. That's what they do. But I can't tell you, it was really, you would be shocked. It was wild. They're literally completely feral, chucking wood on, jumping over it. It's fascinating. Anyway. So, pardon?
Lehit lahavut.
Lehit lahavut, to kind of, exactly, the flame on fire. And some of them caught fire, yeah. Lovely. So, how did they even lift? Right? Remember what we're going for as well? Tradition is the handing of the flame, not the worship of the ashes. So, how did they lift the Mizbeach? The Mizbeach was like huge, right? How did they lift it? So, the key is, thing to know, first of all, the Mizbeach, the wooden Mizbeach, was hollow. There was a smaller Mizbeach for the golden one for incense. That was small. That was holdable. That was about just bigger than this. A bit heavy, but they could lift it. But this Mizbeach was huge, but it was hollow. What they would do when they would get to a new place in the wilderness, they'd put it down, then they'd fill it with earth to the very top, and they'd do sacrifices on top. So that's why you could lift it. It was hollow. By the way, think what that meant, by the way. That means when they left, they would lift it up, and what would be left behind? A mound. Yeah. So in my image, as they went through the wilderness, there were all these mounds everywhere. And you know why that's cool? Because the Ramban says, at the beginning of Vayikra, that what was the Mishkan? The Mishkan was a portable Har Sinai. It's the Shavuot, because on Shavuot, Hashem came down and gave us the Torah, and we heard the Ten Commandments, and that was the beginning of our relation with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. But then God said, as you know, the beginning of Tumah, I'm going to come and live with you. So the Mishkan was the God traveling within the wilderness. So the Ramban actually says that the Mizbeach was a recreation of Har Sinai. So when they lifted and went off, they left these little Har Sinais all over the midbar. Isn't that cool? I'm trying to give a visual image for you so you won't forget it when they went through the wilderness. But so they lifted it up, but what happened to the flame? What happened to the flame? That's the question. So the Pasuk says at the end of our Bamidbar, when they're packing up, and it's one of the last things that they would do. It's a pasuk that no one ever reads because, like, the packed at the end of Bamidbar, but it's right here. V'dishnu, and you were right on track, by the way. V'dishnu et hamizbeach u'pasu alav beged al gaman. What does that mean? V'dishnu et hamizbeach. Deshen. What's the deshen? Too much deshen. The ashes. The ashes. We're not talking cricket here. Okay, the ashes, right? They dishnu et hamizbeach. They would throw the ashes away. Or pasu alav beged hamishkan, and then on the mizbeach, from the mizbeach, and then they would wrap up the mizbeach. Right? So they literally threw the ashes away. And in fact, by the way, Trumat Hadeshen, the throwing of the ashes away, was what they did every morning in the Mishkan. Right? Anybody like doing barbecues? Right? You have to clean out the ashes from your barbecue. And if you get rid of all the ashes, the flame doesn't catch as well. You like a little bit of ashes, right? It's interesting. We're getting quite technical here. I spent a good afternoon learning all about ashes and heat and transfer and everything to learn this as well. But you want to keep some ashes, but they threw some ashes. And the Kohen Gadol, by the way, is the beginning of the Seder of Tzav. The Kohen Gadol changed clothing, right? Because, when you go in the garden, you put the jeans on, right? You take off your stuff. So the Kohen Gadol changed clothing, lahavdil, right? And then got rid of the ashes every day. Was involved in it, and then they could light the new things, but they left some ashes behind. But here, they've got to get rid of it. They throw all the ashes away because they're hot ashes. Right? What happens if you try and wrap curtains in hot ashes? Exactly, right? And threw the ashes away and wrapped the Mizbeach. But Rashi asks a question, and it's an amazing Rashi. So if you're interested, it's chapter 4, verse 13, and here's the Rashi. Got 5 more minutes, right? Okay, good. So we're building up. Here we go. The Shuat HaMizbeach. Dishnu, right? Upashal of Begaman, right? Ve'esh, this is Rashi, and we'll translate, and I'm going to ask you what it's referring to. Ve'esh sheyada min hashamayim, and the flame that had come down from heaven, muvutsa takat habeged, was existed underneath the coverings, ka'ari, like a lion. What does that mean?
Still burning underneath.
It's still burning underneath? They kept the flame going, the flame that had come down from heaven. Now, you know about this flame that came down from heaven? You know what happened on the first day of the Mizbeach, right? Normally, we would light the fire every morning, but on the first day, there was a mistake of Aaron's sons. They weren't supposed to bring fire. Hashem's fire came down. And it lit it. That's divine flame. What happens to the divine flame? Do divine flames go out? Interesting, right? I researched the whole history of the divine flame. She's saying this flame would come down, had originally come down, was still burning, and when they ever lit the Mizbeach, it was always from that flame. The flame kept going. But it says they wrapped it up. But how could they wrap it up? Doesn't make any sense. So then Rashi says, B'sha'at ha'masaot, at the time of the journeys, right? Eino sofato, it didn't burn up the curtains. Why? Because shahayu kofin aleha pesachter shel nochoshet. They put it inside, and you know what pesachter shel nochoshet is? It's a copper pot. They had a special copper pot, and they would take the flame from this beach, right? Whether it had some fire wood underneath it, I don't know, and put it inside this silver pot. It's got its copper pot, I presume with holes in, because if you know about your heat exchange, you need oxygen. And they'd wrap it then in the curtains and carry it with them, right? We haven't got time for the whole show of what happened to that flame. Did it keep going? Where is it now? And did it keep going? It's a whole other thing. But literally, what does the Pasuk say? They would carry the flame with them through the wilderness and leave the ashes behind. It's the origin of the quote I was telling you. This is it. Right? Leave the ashes behind. Do not worship the ashes. The ashes of yesterday's Mizbeach, the korban that had to be pure to God, were really important. But that was yesterday's korban. And now it's just ash. And you leave it behind. And we're going to carry the flame forward. A few months ago, we read about one of the shul in the centre of London got sold. Right? And someone going, oh, it's so terrible, a shul got sold. Now, if a shul gets attacked, God forbid, right? Like with the ambulances, right? And in Golders Green, and the shul next door got burnt. And our chief rabbi, amazing, turned up. Remember, they saw it on TV? And he said, He walked into the shul with the charcoal and he goes, "We're praying here tonight. We're carrying on." It was great. It was really strong. We're carrying on. Right? If we get attacked, of course we have to keep going. That's important. That's keeping the flame alive. But an old shul that we sell, of course it's sad because people community used to be there. But you know what? They've moved. Judaism moved. We've always been moving. So it's sad to sell, but it's don't worship the ashes. We should buy the synagogue and turn it back into some kind of museum. Shuls are not museums. Jews go to living shuls, right? Please God, Edgeware here. That's great. But one day, people might move on from Edgeware and then it'll close and we'll go somewhere else. And that's okay, right? I'm from Edgeware. I can say that. Okay? Do you understand what I mean? There's a great story. We have, what time are we finishing? Quarter past. I'll finish what? There's a great story that I heard from Mav Meir Soloveitchik about when Agnon got the Nobel Prize. Do you know about this? You know Shah Agnon? Like I think in his 30s or 40s, a brilliant writer, got the Nobel Prize for Literature. And so he goes to Oslo, is it? Yes, Oslo. In Oslo to get the Nobel Prize. And they often invite Nobel Prize winners from previous years. And the most famous... Who's the famous? I've got to remember his name now. Famous, if you come back to me, Professor. What's his name? He was Saul Bellow. Saul Bellow is American Jewish, well, not particularly religious, but a passionate Zionist. Saul Bellow is a great writer, and he'd won the Nobel Prize many years earlier. So you have this kind of younger Israeli man, and this older American Jew. Right, and Bellow goes to Agnon, Mazel Tov, and Agnon goes, "Thank you so much, Professor Bellow, but I have to be honest. I feel a bit sorry for you." Typical Israeli. Bellow, "What do you mean you feel sorry for me?" He says, "Well, you write in English. And English is a wonderful language. It's creative, it's beautiful, and it's been around for many years. Shakespeare, the development English is great, but it's not going to last forever. It's been around for, there's been other languages. But I write in Hebrew. And Hebrew's not going anywhere. Hebrew's the language of the Bible. Hebrew's the language of thousands of years. And thousands of years in the future, people will still be reading Hebrew, and so they'll be able to read my books." First of all, we all know young Israelis. So it doesn't surprise us that. I'm Israeli, actually. I can say that as well, because I'm Israeli. Okay? The kind of a bit of chutzpah, right? But he's making a point. He's making a point. We mustn't get nostalgic for the structures. Not the structures, right? That's worshipping the ashes. The flame is alive. The flame is what's happening next. The flame is those boys fighting in Israel, defending our country and the future, right? Or even in the Eurovision, right? When he says "Am Yisrael Chai" at the end of his song, or when they're waiting for the numbers to go through, and he's saying the Shema. On screen, he's saying the Shema, right? There's videos even of him that Shabbat making Kiddush. And because he's Sephardi, he's not looking at a book. He's doing it by heart, Kiddush. Okay? That's our tradition. That's the flame. Right? Now, we might see that's a bit modernized. It's all noise. It's not music, those people. But it's where the things are today. New songs, new interpretations, new words, new Judaism's always got to be Hayom, right? Rashi says, right? Hayom's got to be as if it's given today. So, and it's amazing. So at Har Sinai, which when we got the Torah, but then we moved, we always lay Bamidbar and Nassau around that time and remind ourselves that Har Sinai is moving. It's moving through the wilderness. Am Yisrael is always on the march. We're on the move to what's next. The flame is in front, right? I once heard a philosopher say, nostalgia is caring more than God. God's moved on. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with the next generation, with the future. Right? You want to build museums and worship the past? That's nice. That's not Judaism. That's cultural, historical stuff. That's interesting. Now, I'm not against Jewish Historical Society. We have the collection of all their volumes. But why are they interesting? Because they inspire the future. So looking to the past to help the future, I'm into. But worshipping it for the sake of it, that is worshipping the ashes. We do not worship the ashes. Every morning the Kohen Gadol got changed and threw out the ashes. But what they did protect was the flame. And even when they packed up the Mizbeach, they put that flame in that pot, and that flame is still burning, and carried it through the wilderness. And I love that image, right? Of all, now you can imagine the Kohanim, that was their job, right? When the Mishkan was open, they would carry a tune, they would sing songs, so like they'd carry a tune. And when they were going to the wilderness, they would carry the Mizbeach, but they're still carrying. Okay, and why it's such a weird thing when you learn like the Levim's job was to carry the Mishkan. Like, why is carrying important? That removals, van workers. Why? Because that's the best image of continuity, of moving forward, of carrying things forward, moving it forward. And that's what the tradition is. So this Shavuot, when we remember Har Sinai, remember that story given the Torah then gets brought down, but it doesn't just sit there on some old mountain that we go back and worship and put temples there. We're not interested that much. You ever been to Har Sinai? Right? They're going Jubal Massa. They're going crazy, by the way. The Egyptians have finally realized it's a great resort. Look it up. It got slowed down because of COVID, but they are building massive hotels. At the moment, there's a small church at the bottom and a mosque as well. Jews occasionally visit, not so safe at the moment, but they are building over the whole plain. Look it up. There's a huge article in the Time a couple of years ago. They're building loads of hotels there because it's going to be a big resort. Sinai in the morning, a beach, and swimming in the afternoon. Because they want to worship a place. We don't even care. We talk about Har Sinai. Every kid knows what Har Sinai is. Never seen a picture of it. Never visited. Who cares? Har Sinai is moving. The flame is moving forward. And that's tradition. So the pasuk was, and we'll finish with this, Deshuat HaMizbeach, upasu alav beged agamon. They would throw the ashes away and then wrap the living flame in a pot and carry it forward. And may we for many years in the future. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much for that. Thank you. That's worth waiting for. Worth waiting for from Purim, right? Okay. I will stop the recording now for those on Zoom, and I will finish off the proceedings here.